some short, just really brief bios I'm going to read out, and then I'm going to hand it over to these far more capable hands. I'm going to go into the other room and direct a few stragglers in. So we're going to have a talk for maybe around half an hour, then open up to any pressing questions from the audience. And then we have, as you can see, copies of the book available for sale and signing. So the easiest way we found to do this is just you can grab your copy, you can get it signed here, and then I just kindly, humbly ask you to pay for it on your way out through the bookstore. And if there are any other books that catch your eye on that journey, I am happy to sell you any other books in the bookstore, even though we are technically closed. So we have Joseph Costello here. Joe Costello has spent more than 4 decades at the crossroads of politics, communications, economics, and energy. He has worked on campaigns from city council races to the presidential level, including serving as communications director for Jerry Brown's 1992 presidential run and advising Governor Howard Dean's groundbreaking 2004 campaign, bringing digital tools into American politics at scale. He has also worked on 3 presidential campaigns in Africa, 2 in Nigeria, and 1 in Tanzania. We also have Zephyr Teachout here tonight. Zephyr Teachout is the author of Corruption in America, Break 'em Up, and a law professor at Fordham. She has run for governor and attorney general of New York and is a columnist for The Nation magazine. And then rounding out the trio, we have Layla Connors, a filmmaker based in East Chatham, the founder and director of Tree Media. Her first feature-length documentary, The 11th Hour, was co-created with Leonardo DiCaprio. The film includes 54 leading thinkers and scientists about the state of the world and the state of the human condition. So I will hand things off, and everyone, if we could just do a round of applause to thank these 3 for joining us.
Thank you. Do I talk into this? Just because you guys can all hear me, but
he said you pick it up.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to the bookstore for doing this. So the way this evening is going to go is I'm going to talk for like a minute. And Lila's going to talk for a minute, and then we're going to really focus on the book and then open it up to a fuller conversation. But I reached out to Amy to do this bookstore event, and it's great to see people here I know, because Joe and I have been friends, became friends 22 years ago when I was the director of online organizing for Howard Dean's campaign. And then, and over the last 20 years, he constantly pushes me to step back from the moment of who's going to run for what and how are we going to deal with this particular crisis to think about politics in a broader sense. That includes introducing me to Hannah Arendt, who I know that who spent a lot of time in Dutchess, as you guys know. And to her vision of politics of when people come together and sit around a table and ask, what should we do? And so tonight we're going to talk about politics, power, and technology. And it's just very exciting to be here.
Yeah, and again, my name is Lila Connors, and I've been in media for a while. And interestingly, media is technology, right? So the medium is dependent on what kind of technology you have. And what we've discovered being in media for almost 30 years now is that it is very difficult to get conversation and deep messages out there because the technology is stopping the message from getting through. So if we're talking about power, we're talking about, and tech, we're also talking about media. And so I've been fascinated and confronting the sort of blocks, the support, and the sort of the pitfalls of our current what we call media sphere, and how to engage people to sort of create the world that we all want to live in. And how do we do that is through story. And if the story about productive heroes and builders and makers and cool people that are doing great things is sort of sidelined for serial killers and anti-heroes, which is what most, mainstream media people are looking for to greenlight, then what kind of culture do you have? And then what kind of power politics do you have? So Joe and I've known Joe for 30 years and did several projects in California around renewable energy, empowering conversations at the local level, and constantly trying to figure out how small d democracy works. And he has thought more about that than most people that I know.
So the book we're talking about tonight is Politics of Ape and Machine, Power as Organization. And instead of doing an extensive reading from it, I'm just going to read a passage and ask Joe to explain what on earth you're talking about. How's that?
All right.
Okay. In the Western tradition, beginning with the Greeks, it's thought that a greater understanding of the world, knowledge, was always a virtue. This Greek ethos laid the foundation of Western scientific thought. 2,000 years after the Greeks, a renaissance of Greek thought, combined with Europe's adoption of Indian numbers and Arab math, sparked the scientific revolution. The ancient Greek ethos that all knowledge was a virtue forcefully reasserted itself, directly transferring itself to the development of technology. Just as it was thought more knowledge was an unmitigated good, so too the ability to create any given technology was accepted uncritically. By the 20th century, technological development became exclusively valued by culturally dominant industrial economic values, capitalist or socialist, with little or no understanding that every technology asserted values of the technology itself. Every technology asserted values of the technology itself. So Joe and I met in the 2003 era when there was a sense that technology was asserting a democratic value, that the internet was the greatest innovation in democratic history. So that was a view of technology not as neutral, but as embedding certain values in it that were positive. There's another view that you hear all the time. Bill Gates said it, I think, last week, which is technologies are neutral, it's what you do with it, right? That technologies have no inherent force. And one of the big arguments of your book, Joe, is that technologies are not neutral. That technology, that we have to look at technology through the lens of power. Can you talk more about what you're describing here?
Okay. Thanks. It's great to be here. So the idea is, it's a pretty simple one, and what I've tried to get across to people for many years is that technology is politics. And so when we adopt a technology, we adopt a certain value of that technology that needs to be understood in order to best use that technology. And so, for example, democracy, which is also a very big thing that I'm been into for a very long time. Democracy is distributed order. It's not centralized order, it's distributed order. So if you have technologies that are consolidating things, they're automatically undemocratic, And so we've had 250 years of industrialization, and industrialization is in and of itself consolidation, right? You consolidate labor, you consolidate resources, you consolidate energy. And so that is consolidated power. That's anti-democratic power. And so what we have to figure out is how you use technology to, if you want democracy, you have to have some kind of democratic architecture to it, right? And if it doesn't have a democratic architecture, you're not going to get democracy out of it. And so the greatest example of this, which everybody here understands, is broadcast media. So broadcast media, first radio, then television came in, owned almost exclusively by three networks, or controlled by three networks for 50 years, and it totally rearranged the social and cultural structure of this country, completely and totally. And it was controlled by three corporations. And so, and most essentially, it totally redid politics in this country to where everything became through television. And so that was anti-democratic, even though you could look at it and everybody could be sitting in their living room and they're all getting the same, message coming through. And so there's a certain kind of democratic element to that, like Andy Warhol said, and another things as far as like industrialization, everyone drinks the same Coke. So there's a certain kind of democratic element to that. But the control of it is, and at the end, democracy is about decision making. and it's having distributed decision making. So when you have 3 corporations deciding what everybody's going to watch, there's nothing democratic about that. And so it was something that changed completely politics. For example, our pre-television, the local counties were the structures of party organization in this country, right? Democrat, Republican. It was at the county level. Now the county structures are pretty much disempowered, and everyone looks at the DNC or the RNC or the DCCC, and everyone's looking at it from a top down. Where 60 years ago, it was much more distributed. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't problems with that system, because there's a lot of problems going, but it was more democratic than what we have now. So these are kind of some examples that I'm using to explain to you.
So I have one more follow-up question, then I want to go to Lila. But I mean, what the effect of that story can be to just give up, because it's like once you have a technology, the technology then controls, and therefore we should just give up. And so moving it from broadcast television to, say, AI or social media, which is controlled by a few people. The advantage of I can't believe I'm quoting Bill Gates here, but the advantage of the Bill Gates vision is that there's some sense of power embedded in it, that just because the technology has been invented doesn't mean we're automatically disempowered. So how do you reconcile the force of centralizing technologies and the sense of possibility?
Well, I mean, that is the politics of technology. That literally is the politics of technology. That's what has to be discussed. So, for example, Bill Gates, good one. So, if you have the history of compute, which is only 75 years old, right? Computer technology is only 75 years old. And it first was these mainframe dumb terminals, and then eventually the computer started getting smaller, and then eventually 30 years later you had the PC, and then the idea was that you would have a computer on every desktop, and so the PC thing took off, and this is the early 80s, and was gigantic, right? But Microsoft got the ability through IBM to control the operating system of the PC. So it was MS-DOS. I don't know, have you guys remember this? But so by controlling the operating system, you could control everything on top of it. So, for example, Microsoft didn't create the word processor, they didn't create the spreadsheet, they didn't create the database, but by the mid-90s, they controlled the desktop. They controlled all those systems. And they did it by manipulating the operating system, which they never were brought on trial for. But they were brought on trial and convicted as monopolists 4 years later for trying to do the same thing with the internet by bringing out the Microsoft browser. And so basically the government stepped in and stopped Microsoft from controlling the internet, because there would have been no Google, there would have been Facebook. And now what you want to say about that, whether that's a good or bad thing, it's open for debate. But anyway, so so the architecture of this system, how you build it and how you allow people, that's the power of the system, right? So now we have, and now you mentioned AI, is that with AI you have this very centralized architecture that developed, right? So back in the 80s, the whole thing was the PC revolution, was that we were distributing compute power and everybody would have it. But then the internet brought it all back together. And so then, you hear about data centers and things like that. Data centers have been building for about 30 years. They started building them a long time ago. And that's about centralizing the control of the data. And then you have a few companies that control all this centralized data. And then you start centralizing the compute power, right? So the other part of this you've heard about AI is these NVIDIA chips, which are very, very powerful computer chips, but it's all centralized. And so all this stuff is all centralized. It doesn't need to be centralized. I don't know if you guys remember Napster 20 years ago. So Napster came out, and that was a more peer-to-peer network view, and they killed it. They stopped it immediately, right? So that architecture is fundamental to how you build a politics on top of it. And a guy I knew he did Lotus 1-2-3, but he said 30 years ago, he only said it once, but it was good to say. He said architecture is politics. So how you design and define the technology defines what you can build on top of it. And like I said, democracy is distributed. If you have centralized systems, you're never going to get democracy out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the internet was born, we thought it was the horizontalization of access to power. So that was the heyday in the 90s. I was in New York City at the time, and I was walking along the street, someone said to me, have you ever heard of the browser? What a browser and what a homepage. It's like, what is that? Prior to that, I was actually hosting something with Echo NYC, and the Well was also in San Francisco, and I was jumping onto the Unix shell out of my computer using Terminal and having conversations with people about deep ideas. And people who knew Unix could actually engage in this conversation. And I actually registered Tree Media and my email for free on the Unix shell. I had to say his web address, @treemedia.com, and there it went, So what's interesting about this centralization of power has to do with knowledge, because right now you can jump onto your terminal and onto the Unix shell and you can have at it all you want still, but no one knows about that, right? So I find that to be really interesting, that as these companies started being created on top of these architectures, like you said, they concentrate power, not just because they're doing that, but also they're not letting you know, and our educational system or whatever, they're not letting people know that these access points are present, right? That goes back to this story. So what I find fascinating about what Joe's presenting in this book also is just what we're doing right now, is talking to each other. Because when I'm my frustration, sometimes when I have an idea and I say, no one can see me because the AI, the algorithm, whatever, is saying I can't say this thing, if it has to do with methane in the Arctic, for example, at the time when I was talking about methane in the Arctic 15 years ago, I decided, well, maybe if I just go down and talk to someone at the coffee shop, and then I'll talk to another person at the coffee shop, that's direct communication. What about radio? You know what I mean? So what is your, in this book, what's your answer to this hyper concentration of power? Because basically the heyday of the internet obviously ended up with the algorithm all the way up on top, right? We're talking about architecture. Base level, you can go around any way you want. People don't know how to do that though. So now you've shrunk wrap like browsers and communities and social communities, now iPhones, and now I've noticed that Apple, like all of a sudden now you can't even see your own hard drive, and it won't even let you write onto your drive because it's now a cloud and whatever. But I mean, I keep telling my kids, like, actually open the terminal and you can do X, Y, and Z, but they don't want to know that. So anyway, forget about all that. Let's just meet in person, right? Isn't that what you're saying? What is the solution? Because if you want democracy in a hyper-centralizing moment of time, what do you do?
Right. So what I would say, so two things on that, which is important. One is Medium, and probably some of you know Marshall McLuhan, who kind of was very important.
Who's throughout the book.
Who understands
Sure. Comments on
The entire
McLuhan.
thing.
who understands the technology, and from him, but he called technology media, but it's the same thing, technology media, and we use media more as like a certain type of technology, but the thing is, any technology that we adopt, the medium that we adopt, and a medium, it's a between here and there. That's what a medium is. There's a power structure in that medium. That's the simple thing. So once you use that medium to talk to another person, there's a power structure in that, whether you know it or not, and it's inserting itself one way or another. Now you can go through this in all sorts of ways, find out how to do it. What we still have as social beings, and why I have this chimp on the front, is that we are social beings. And we have face-to-face communication. And what we've lost with all this media, using the more narrow sense of broadcast media and the internet and things like that, is we've completely lost our ability to meet and talk face-to-face. And so what I tell everybody, and we can all look around and see that our political system is not working. And when I say this, I'm not just faulting Trump, by any means, so he's part of it. But, this has been going on for a long time. And I would say that, basically the agrarian republic that we created 250 years ago never made it through industrialization, And so we have to rethink and redo that. And the way to start, the most radical politics that we have today is for us to get together face to face and start talking and then build up from there. And that is, and when I say that, a lot of kind of educated people or thinking people, they all go, oh yeah, and then what? No, not and then what? That. Just that is where you go, and from there you can build up.
One of your chapters, I think it's your third chapter, talks about a particular mechanism for people to come together with power, which is the jury.
Yeah.
And so we tend to think of the jury as playing a very specific role, like deciding individual cases. What kinds of ways, how can we, what do you argue about how the jury relates to Athens, Rome, and what we could do today?
Right. Okay. So juries are really, as far as democracy in America, they were far and away the most democratic institution that we ever had. Maybe you could argue some of these New England town halls are kind of right there, but they're kind of like
Grange halls.
they're kind of jury systems, and the jury system is bringing people together and learning about an issue, talking about an issue, and then making a decision. That's democracy. And so we need to go and reform our system to make that more part of everything that we do, this jury system. So, for example, Athens, which you brought up, in Athens, the jury system at its height, the Supreme Court in Athens was the whole assembly, was the assembly of the citizenry. They didn't have 9 guys or 5 guys or whatever. If there was a big case and it was going to be decided, everyone was interested in it, the whole assembly was called, and it was the case was put in front of the assembly, and the assembly voted and decided, what the case was. So the jury system is a way for us to, learn, to discuss, and then to decide. And it's an old institution. I mean, it goes all the way back to Athens. Athens the jury system comes out of Athens originally, and so. That is, how do we bring that in, and how do we see, like, what we've lost is the idea with democracy, what we've especially lost in this country is the idea that collective identity is the identity, but we've become this super hyper individual where individualism, which actually I think is a reaction to the industrial society. So look around us. Everything here, everything we wear was created collectively by other people. Yet we don't know anything about that. All we do is we just purchase it. And then we have no second thought. So I'm kind of going this, but anyway, Jane Goodall, who just died, and her thing was to everybody was to just think about everything that you use and how it got there from beginning to end. And so when you start doing that, that's how you can start changing things. And what the culture above us, what it does is it just gives us this, gives us 5 different Cokes and say, see, you have choice. And, that's not a choice. And so the thing is to think about how these things are all got to us. And then we have to come together and decide what to do about it. And I would say, and the biggest thing is we've got a big problem is, you got 435 Congress people. And if you look at the history of America is the local power being gradually usurped and brought into Washington, D.C. And so today we all look to Washington, D.C. to kind of try to solve anything. But you've got 435 congressmen, 100 senators, and 1 president, and 9 Supreme Courts. So, you got 545 people, and you're going to say that they can in any way represent 350 million people? It just doesn't work. So, like, what I tell people, it's not the people that are in this process, where I say it's not just the people that are in the process, the system isn't working. And it's a 250-year-old system. And one of the reasons it's not working is because of the technology that all came up. When the Constitution was formed, 90% of America was farmers.
And they lived here.
Yeah. Right.
Still see the names.
So
Farms.
we don't think about that. And then, you had all this change, and you had the whole Industrial Revolution. And now I will say that this, called the quantum information compute era, it's just as radical, if not more radical, than the Industrial Revolution. And we're just at the beginning of it. And our politics doesn't just go back 250 years, because those guys look to Athens and Rome. So it goes back 2,000 years, which isn't necessarily bad, except for we have to think, how does that work today? Because it doesn't work the same way it worked back then.
Yeah, so I would say my biggest question for you, Joe, is yes, we're talking, but there's also, nuclear weapons and armies and bases around the world. And how does it feel so daunting that people, like we had a meeting, Kate Butler, if anyone knows Kate, she got a grant to talk about what Chatham needs, right? And she held a meeting at the, what was it, Matthew? The meeting place in North Chatham, the new building that they redid, the railroad station or whatever. Anyway, we all met. There were some people there, and we were all talking about what we thought Chatham would be like, which is exactly what you're talking about. And everyone was talking, and then we went away, went home, and went to work the next day, whatever. So like, how do we go from just small groups of people talking, which I love, to having purchase on the direction of the entire nation with all these armies and interests? And it just seems a little difficult.
I have an easy answer to that, actually.
Okay, good. Really?
but easy in thought, but not in doing. And the thing is what I try to talk about is like hierarchy. What we know is social hierarchy in these institutions and this thinking goes back 10,000 years to the beginning of the agrarian age. And so like political hierarchies and power hierarchies and stuff, they're very old, entrenched in our culture, not in us, but in our cultures. And so that's how we know how to do things. Yet one of the great scientific things that's happened, say, in the last 150 years is we've learned about distributed networks, distributed horizontal networks, and that is what can provide just as much, even be more stable than hierarchical systems. Actually, more stable than hierarchical systems, right? Like how cell interacts, how fungi, they're decentralized systems, how ecological systems are. Ecological systems have no one in control going, this happens. Everything's interacting together, and ecological systems can be very stable. So what we need to do is create kind of the bottom nodes of this, which is our face-to-face organizations, and then we need to network those together. And so, for example, I've been talking to Zephyr a little bit, about in New York when Mamdani got elected, and one of the things I was saying is that the cities need to start talking to each other. They don't need to go to, everyone in New York doesn't need to go to Albany and then to DC to find out how it's thinking. Like, they should talk to, New York should talk to Buffalo, and New York should talk to Chicago, and not just talk to them, but they should start creating interconnections. Because when they find out, because you're sitting here in Chatham, and then you go all over this upstate New York area, and you'll find a lot of things are the same, a lot of problems that they share a lot of problems. So, all right, why not figure out together how to do those? And one of the things they're going to find is that the same corporations control a lot of the stuff that is done, even though you're living in Little Chatham. A lot of the corporations, there's a handful of corporations that are bringing most things to here. So how do you then start going together to go against that power to change things? And so that's where the answer is. Now, like I say, democracy is, in thought, it's really easy, but it takes work. You got to be, if you want to be a citizen, it takes work. It's not easy. You can't just go and do it. But that's okay. It could be some of the most fulfilling thing you ever did. you know? So that's what I would say. The answer to yours is organize and start networking. That's what I would say.
Well, there's some wonderful, in this book, there's some wonderful discussions of Stephen Jay Gould and science. There's also a lot of history, and my last question has to do with the role of history. You write, nonetheless, through this current of superficial events, our short lives interact with history. For any given time, the determinant of health for any politics depends on how well history is incorporated into its movements and decisions. Unknowingly, the modern era experienced powerful movements of the deeper and slower currents of history, catalyzing the more ephemeral surface events. Paradoxically, the rise of these deep currents were the result of historically unprecedented technological development. So, can you just sort of play out a little bit more what the role that you think history is currently playing and could play in politics?
I think I give you a short answer on that. It's simply history tells us how we've come to be who we are. You know, it does not necessarily provide a roadmap to where we can go, but it does say here's how we got here, and we should understand that because everything that got here. So, in a really important part of this is, and she mentioned Stephen Jay Gould, who's did some wonderful stuff on this, and history is contingent, right? So A happens, then B happens, then C happens, but A happens, and then if B doesn't happen, C never happens, right? And contingency is completely different than deterministic. And what we like to think, and it's a very old cultural prejudice, that the future is determined. And the tech guys are playing on this a whole lot, right? So the tech guys are going, we see the future, this is the future. And trust me, these guys don't see the future. They're very...
They see a future they want.
Yeah, they see... Exactly. So that's exactly right. So,
yes.
You know, and they have a very narrow view of things. Like, you know, and again, but, you know, specialization's really, you know... I used to blame Adam Smith with the division of labor, but it actually goes back to science, the beginning of the scientific revolution. You know, specialization, everyone got specialized. And so you can be enormously successful in the society knowing very, very little. Right? No, you can't. You just know one thing. And, yeah.
That is the
yeah, that's how it goes,
to be
right?
Successful.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why
so,
they say the meek will inherit the earth.
But
because
that
they're
doesn't
like-
give a good, vibrant thing.
serious.
And politics is actually should be how we bring together these specializations to kind of decide how it's working for the whole, right? But so these tech guys, and understand this goes to technology too, right? Is that these tech guys, they know a very narrow thing. They know how their technology works, and they just want to make that keep going forward, how that... And, you know, like I always use Bill Gates as an example. You know, Bill Gates spent 50 years in front of his screen just worrying about Microsoft. Nothing else. I mean, he was not an educated guy. He, you know, culturally sufficient guy. And now, as a convicted monopolist, they let him keep all of his money. And now he goes out talking about anything he wants. And I don't have any problem about anybody saying anything they want. But when you have this money to make your view of things seem more important than others, I have a big problem with that, especially when you don't know half of what you're talking about. And it's amazing the bullshit, excuse my French, that comes out of these tech guys' mouth. If you know things and they say certain things about various other things, they're completely wrong. But nobody holds them to account on that. So part of understanding that is to know history, and technology destroys history. So when you're born into a certain area with certain technology, you don't understand the past at all. And not only do you not understand it, you don't think it's important, and you think that this technology you're born into, it's just like a fish in water. You think, well, that's just how it is.
Well, that's the last thing I'll say about my Unix idea, and the last thing I'll say before questions, right, is that, you know, things are hidden that are available. See, knowledge has to penetrate reality. And as we know, even spiritually, all the way down to politics, anything, is there's a lot of things that are hidden from view, right? And people, besides just meeting together, people have to become more curious exactly about how things are made, how things are presented to us, everything. All bets are off. And I think that is actually something that's happening now. There's so much chaos going on that young people are looking at that very much. They're saying, like, well, how did we get here? What is going? Wait, what? Because everything is kind of disappearing. They grew up in the pandemic, right? So imagine growing up, like, being in high school. My kids were in high school during the pandemic and middle school, and they don't trust anything. So, but that's good, because now they're looking at the guts of stuff. And so we are going to have, even though the AI guys think they have the future all locked up, I think the young ones who are coming back and making stuff with their own bare hands and might have a different idea about what the future looks like. So,
Absolutely.
hopefully.
And let's hopefully, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, so I
And
love
just
what
make sure you say your name and yeah.
My name is Elizabeth Diggs. I'm a playwright, but I also love history, and I love what you say about history. And I'm very distressed. I taught playwriting for 30 years at NYU at Tisch, and I had a lot of students who didn't know very much. And I also have granddaughters who don't know very much because of textbooks, because the textbooks are so wrong. So changing people's understanding of history, you have to change the education, and there are huge roadblocks to that we know about, right? And
Absolutely.
and how do you get through that? How do you manage to get people to understand? I mean, what the truth of history is, which to me is absolutely crucial. And the older I get, it's wonderful to be old, because now I know way more than I did when I was younger. and I also have I think it's so important for people to understand history, period. And so how do you get around that? How do you get around the regulations and the technology and the people who don't want to know anything?
In the short, I can say that these structures we have in society are completely insufficient and incapable of dealing where we are at this point. And that's not historically, that's not, unprecedented by any means. And, so because you kind of look at like history and you look at, civilizations and things, and all of a sudden it seems like they just fall apart. They never just fall apart. They just become incapable of dealing with what's happening, right? And so that's where we're at. And so, our school system is just atrocious in teaching what we need to know. But part of that is like, this information revolution, which is gigantic, and it's not just now, like if you look at human development from, where we're hunter-gatherers and, for most of our existence, and information's not really that important, and everybody's dealing with everything at the same time. So there's no real thing. And then when agrarian culture came, there's technology, and then that requires more information. So there's more information. So there comes a value in controlling this information, right? And then the industrial era comes, and that brings in a whole mass new amount of information, And we did not do a good job of figuring out how to do that now, right? And now we're in this whole, like I said, called the quantum compute information era, and now it's just even more so information. So all I can say again, and so I'll just bring up this guy. There was this guy, Norbert Wiener. I don't know if you guys heard of him. He was from MIT, professor, and he developed feedback. The idea of feedback, which is essential to all this automated tech that's coming out, it's the whole idea. And he said that America was a know-how society, and we needed to become a know-what society. Right. And so, and I can tell from people like that I've talked to all my life, when I start bringing ideas out to them and stuff, right? Americans immediately go, okay, so what do we do? And I said, no. You have to think about this for a second, because the only way we can understand how to do something if we know what we're going to do. And we don't know what we're going to do at this point, right? So all I can say is that that's part of the problem. And I can't tell you, like, say I'm the smartest guy ever in politics and I can tell you what to do. And if I was and I could do that, you wouldn't understand it, because no one would understand it, because it's going to be completely different than how we do a lot of things now. So I would just say that's part of the problem. So how do we deal with that? And again, my political solution is people got to get together and start talking.
And there's also YouTube. All I'm saying is it's interesting. Like a lot of people, like everybody, there's not a lot of people that want to go there on economics, let's say, or politics. There's just a certain group of people that I just saw, blew my mind, a 22-year-old debating a 26-year-old on Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman, the economist. And I was like, how did these kids know anything about this? And they knew what they were talking about. And they were just debating these micro ideas, and it's all from YouTube, right? Not saying that YouTube is all good, obviously not. But if you're interested to circumvent the textbook problem, I think the kids have long departed from the textbook.
Yeah.
I think they've left that, and so they're in the wild west of the open internet when it comes to.
Yeah.
And I want to get some other discussions. Just one thing to add, because Friedman came up and Gates, so I can't help.
Sorry,
You brought Gates, so there you go.
But clearly, one of the functions of modern economics has been to remove history as a sort of key device of understanding. And it is both economics as trying to own the future, as sort of a predictive priestly class, and also to erase the importance of the past through modeling as a way to understand the world, as opposed to history to understand the world. So as we're trying to re-understand what are the disciplines and what are the ways of seeing that can enable democracy, it's not that economics can't play a helpmeet role, but its central role in both Democratic and Republican ideology has really removed history. And then, of course, Gates was really central in that, in his aggressive takeover of the public school system, in removing history in favor of skills.
Right.
My name is Tia Spitzberg, and I live in Rhinebeck now, but I spent about 40 years living in a Detroit suburb next to the border, so this is a new place for me. But I'm thinking that I think the emphasis on STEM is a huge problem, because it ignores ways in which art teaches things about mathematics, architecture, all this other stuff. And so kids are pushed into this STEM way of thinking.
Yeah.
And it goes even, it also harms itself in certain ways, because there's this thing going on Facebook, this little thing, discussion. Why did I take algebra? Because I never used it. Well, you don't have to use algebra. It's a study. You can study it. You can learn a lot from it. So I think this sort of weird narrowness of what's important as a hierarchy for thinking
absolutely.
is really troubling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two. This is actually both Robert Oppenheimer, and there's, if you want to, there's 3 different talks of Oppenheimer on YouTube. And look, part of this technology is it's quite amazing. You know, like the internet, it's been a disaster in all sorts of ways from when I thought first was introduced to it 35 years ago. But in other ways, it's an amazing technology as ever been doing. But there's these Oppenheimer talks up from like the 50s, and both him and Wiener had the same thing about the humanities taking the idea and trying to be sciences. And actually, Veblen also talked about this. And the humanities are not sciences, right? And so how do you, there's plenty of knowledge in the humanities for what we need to do is live and have good lives and, you know, full life, right? But we've tried to take everything and make it a science, right? So for, like, example, economics, which is a perfect example, right? Economics is not a science. It's how we organize ourselves to how we deliver and produce goods. Right. Yeah. So there's all sorts of things on this, but it's a very important point, and you know. But what we're doing is we're just trying to, you know, we're allowing the technology to, define us instead of us working with the technology to define something that's bigger.
There's a lot of people talking about STEAM.
Right,
Which
yeah,
includes
that's
art.
kind of a compromise.
Well, that is true. They shoved the A and there's four other letters. But, I mean,
Yeah, I see two hands. Yeah, Matt and
What about money? Money's driving everything, isn't it?
Oh.
Including what kids study.
So money is a technology, right? From a very old technology.
Yes.
And
Which is
so
run amok.
yeah, right. And it's been, I don't know, you guys might remember this guy, Bill Greider. And he wrote this book called Secrets to the Temple, which was about the Federal Reserve, which is an interesting book to read now because the money system is completely different than it was 40 years ago when he wrote that book, which is interesting. But it's about, money is a mechanism of control, and what we've done is we've taken all of our interactions and made them monetary. What Marx, and I'm not a big fan of Marx, but he had some brilliant ideas. But one of them was that we were going to commodify all of society, which meant that it could then become a transaction. And so that's what we've done. So we have to, like the jury system, this is the exact thing. The jury system allows decision making, a non-monetary decision making. So if you empower it, you can make decisions besides just monetary decisions. So that would.
Right, 'cause people are going to be interested in it.
Yeah. Well, no, you've got to that's the key. I mean, that's definitely true. So I'm not here to tell everybody this is what's going to happen. I'm going to say, here's where we're at, and if we want to get out of it, these are some of the things we have to start thinking about.
One of the most helpful things that I've heard recently is when Wall Street said, "Hey, wait a minute, AI may be a bubble.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's not put all this money into it."
Yeah.
I have so many different converging thoughts here, but one of them was, and because you brought up Gates, is I remember I was very efficient at PageMaker very early and when he destroyed PageMaker with Microsoft Word because of what you described, having it on all computers, it wasn't even about, it had nothing to do with humanities or anything, and I was sort of, I just came from Germany, growing up in a totally different, I would use the word social way right now, but not socially, the way Americans use the word means mingling, but to be empathic towards others and know where they are and where I stand and work together as a network, which is what you're looking at, not just conversation. So I want to bring that social back. But I've observed that, and the particular, the CorelDRAW, PageMaker, and this force, and I call that the technology force, to destroy other much, much better systems for their own, because Microsoft Word is probably the worst.
It's the worst one.
On the planet. And here we are building.
They never innovated anything.
And I could not. I
terrible.
literally, I think I was 19, and I don't know if I cried, but that feeling where you feel like there's something really wrong.
Right. Yeah.
That was all these people, and I would ask, I said, wait a minute, this is a much better program. Why doesn't he integrate it? No, he destroyed, and it was because I was in higher circles where a lot of these tech guys. I was at a very big advertising company. They bought some of the first computers, Macs and stuff. And this conversation went round, and that it's purposefully destroyed, just like purposefully misled. So the misleading destruction of something else to consolidate is something that I see is very interesting with this whole technological thing. And something always came to me was the arrogance. So I always felt like this whole money thing, technology, all these things are like this like when Terminator, when the aluminum, the liquid aluminum stack and builds the Terminator again, that feeling was always there, that all these systems converge into this perfect soldier and just take you out. And the interesting thing is, and that is that socialism, which is so hated in this country, the word, it's like, because I really don't know why, because I think Americans are very social, meaning we're caring people, but it's been driven out of us to even think this way, because it means we are, or what my feeling now is that we are a society that really lacks empathy in America.
Yeah.
We really lack systemic empathy.
Yeah.
Right? So we're all cool because we kind of made it through this disaster because we shut up, we bought in, we did all this. So we have enough money to live because it's all about money. And money is that force that drives technology. And if you look what, how many billions, I think it's like trillions of dollars are being poured into AI.
Yeah.
It's just insane. Or Facebook and,
Yeah. I think insane's the right word.
it's really, it's like an insanity, and it's all being siphoned away from somewhere else,
Yeah.
And so you have this arrogance that we're going to solve this problem. Then you have this thing that you described. We need to really start talking. But what are we talking about is the big question, right?
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, it's not socialism, but it's like we have to bring back a system where the money, the centralization,
Democracy.
which is the first sentence.
Democracy. I like the term democracy.
And it's messy.
Yeah, it's absolutely messy. Absolutely. It's okay. That's okay.
A relationship.
Life is messy. Anyone can tell you that. But democracy, yeah.
Hi, I'm David Weiner. I'm also from Rhinebeck, not surprisingly. I'm a retiree who's a political activist. I've been a community organizer, and I've served on 3 juries. And having done that, I'm reminded of the old saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And so what it makes me think about, and then having done a lot of community organizing, it's very hard to get people to pay any attention at all. And so I'm trying to think of how practically you would have a jury system in the broader sense of the word, like even elect a congressman or get Congress to be more of a, to go. It seems like it would require an ideal political being that just doesn't exist.
No, I don't think it's so.
I want to say that I thought you had some really great insights.
But it's none of that.
I totally relate to that.
That's true.
Besides that, how is to play Mrs. Lincoln? But no, look, here's what I would say. 2 things on that is that you have to value. You're going to have to value the jury system, right? And so to get to Matthew's point here, right? We as a society at this point only know how to value something with money. But you look going through history, you look back at history, there was a lot of things that were valued, societies had that valued powerful things that, this is the value on this, right? Second thing I would say, you're around my era, and I was in politics as this all changed, and I saw the same thing you did. Like, but it goes back farther than that. Like the citizen in America has been over time destroyed, and so now most Americans, all they look at in politics is elections. So they only have one ability to impact it, and that's once every 2 years or once every 4 years, and that's all that's expected of them. And that's not enough. That's not enough. And then the whole system of campaigning of the election process, that becomes politics. That's not good, because what is politics now is marketing and advertising. Marketing and advertising isn't democracy. Marketing and advertising is business. So all these things are what I'm saying. I understand what you're saying, and it's going to have to change. I'm not telling you that it's going to change. What I'm saying is I'm giving ideas about this is where we got to go, and this is how we got to do it. And like I said again, if I was the most brilliant guy in the world and I could tell you guys exactly how to do this, you wouldn't understand that if I could even tell you that. But I can't tell you that because I don't know.
But let me be a Joe translator here for a second. Because, let's say we don't know how to do it. But one thing you could do is say, okay, use, and this is happening right now in Connecticut around zoning reform. And there's many more experiments in Europe, but there's some experiments in the U.S., is you take, like a jury, you randomly select people and you pay them and you give them a task. And so I think the Connecticut model right now is, it's around tax reform, is that the citizens' assembly that's brought together, randomly selected, paid $500 for a weekend over a several-month period, they come up with a proposed solution that the assembly then has to explain why they're not doing it. It's just a
That's
beginning.
kinda cool.
It
I
is
like
cool.
that.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah, no, right.
But
So,
it's just
yeah.
like to start thinking. I don't know the other ways it could be used, but I hear the the request to recognize that history has changed over time, so we're not stuck, and to say, okay, how could we do this? And you know, having had all this experience, probably have better ideas about like how in Dutchess County you could have a Dutchess County model where you take 100 randomly selected citizens. You know, I care a lot about small business, who then come together and actually propose reforms. So it's starting to think like that.
And
There's actually, sorry, just on that, that just popped in my Kiva. So there's this, in terms of money, you know, like we always look to, you know, the local banks used to be able to greenlight loans or not greenlight loans, but now it's hyper centralized, right?
Yeah.
So you can't, local bankers who might know you might not give you a loan because they can't, because there's other algorithms that decide against it.
Totally. It's brutal.
Well, you know the whole Kiva system, right? So the have you guys heard of that? Like immigrants, they have no access to, or maybe some poor people in some communities, they create their own bank. So they all tithe to the same thing, and then they have committees that decide where the money goes in their community. It's really interesting. So that lifts up the community the way they want. So if like somebody has to go to the hospital or they want to fix a car or whatever, they'll give that person the money, and it just kind of goes around. So they nurture their community the way they choose, and they don't have to go outside for that money, which I think. Let's do that.
yeah, there's all sorts of things.
Sorry.
I'll
Right?
come back
I
to
like that
Elizabeth,
idea.
but I want to, yeah.
Sparked a thought because you used the word community, which is what you've been talking about. And I think that the issue is not a current problem, it's really a human problem. Because humanity, we're conditioned to think that we are singular, independent, and autonomous, and we're not. And that's how we function every day through our lives, you know. I'm gonna do this without considering that I have an impact on anything or anyone. And that's fact, that's not true.
But I think that's a very modern idea. That's a very, very modern idea. No, I think that's a very modern idea.
This is Buddhism.
No, I think it's a
No,
very
no,
modern
no,
idea.
there's a mistranslation. You're thinking that individualism is a modern idea. Joe is saying the idea that you aren't connected is the modern idea. And
No, but what I'm saying is
you
that
guys are
the
agreeing.
ways that, we are agreeing, but what I'm suggesting is
You don't have to agree, but you are.
I'm suggesting is that any solution always has to start with the individual person to want to think differently, live differently, participate differently. And people are content, you know?
I don't think anybody's content in this country today. I'll say one thing. And I've been in politics for or following it for 45 years, and
It's more persuasive when you say in.
and I can tell one thing which I've talked about suffering in a while about. This AI issue is made people tremendously anxious, and it can be used as a lever to open up every other issue and to get out of this little trap that we're in.
You said earlier, it's controlled by a very select few people.
Which is one of the
who are
issues.
not willing
No, but which is one of the issues. This is what I'm saying. So that goes and says, AI brings up the whole idea of centralized corporate control. And Americans, it's like an 80% issue. It's been 30% for 30 years. For 30 years.
Wasn't that the case 150 or 200 years
Yeah.
Railroad magnates and everything was the same thing.
Well, the populace lost to the corporations. So, but that doesn't mean that has to continue.
No, I agree, it doesn't have to continue. All I'm saying is that it's not new. This has been the case.
I would agree 100%.
So, how do we change the human condition? How do we change humanity? And
That's a big question. That's a big question. I don't agree with that, but I think it's I think it's collective. I think it's collective.
We need in democracy. We need real disagreement.
I think it's collective. That's what I would say. I think we need to understand that we're part of something, and to do that means to come together face to face to understand that.
I agree
That's what I'm saying,
100%.
right?
But it also has to be that people are willing to compromise and learn.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
and-
absolutely.
And be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt.
Elizabeth.
Completely agree.
I wanted to give some examples from my own work about specifics of history, how to study history. I've written several plays and about historical figures, and the important thing to me that I discovered is you must go to the original source. You cannot use secondary sources. They're all
No, I agree.
biased in one way or another. And so one example was a play that I wrote called Grant and Twain, about Ulysses Grant and Mark Twain. And what I discovered there, I won't say much about, is that almost the entire secondary information on both of those men is really wrong. And on Ulysses Grant, it is radically wrong.
That's terrible.
And all people, everybody thinks they know something about Grant, that he was a drunk and that he had a lousy, he was a lousy president. That's not true.
No.
There are no firsthand witnesses of anyone who ever saw him.
Yeah, his autobiography is one of the great
It's
works of
fantastic.
American
It's
history.
absolutely
Yeah,
brilliant.
oh,
And that's the first source that you can go to.
right.
And then you can read, well, I read, a dozen biographies, and most of them just quote each other. And there are probably 20 books about Grant that just are nothing but lies. The entire
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It's
right.
incredible, isn't it? It's
and,
incredible.
and almost no one knows that Twain idolized Grant. He said, he was 13 years younger, he said of Ulysses Grant, "I am a Grant intoxicated man." And he saved him, as you know, I guess, but very few people do. Anyway, one of the great things that I did, it was a wonderful experience to discover the truth. The truth. That's something that I think is really important in history. What really happened? So you have to go to the people who were there, and you have to find out. And right now, you can also find out what people really think if you ask them. But you have to ask, and just like you're saying, you have to be in a situation where people, what do you think about democracy? Or what do you think about Trump? Or what do you think about Mondami? And what do you think about Israel?
Absolutely.
And then it has to be a situation where people have the courage.
Yeah.
Courage is something that is really lacking in this country.
It's not a commodity value.
Well, that also speaks to the
So many
news.
people from, from abroad, from Germany, I mean, we have never done anything to own what we did with slavery
Yeah.
and everything else too with the Native Americans. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I grew up hearing stories about the Indians and what we did to them. And one of my plays was about Custer, and it took me 2 years to find out what really happened with Custer, because it was one way or the other. Almost everybody wrote that everything that was wrong, and when I finally found out what did happen, that was a huge relief.
Yeah.
Well, and also the news. The news, because the news is now
Yes,
the
yes, the news
intermediary
is-
between us and quote unquote reality. We all know that it's got it wrong most of the time. And the older I get, I go, I was there and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I watched it. I had firsthand, on some serious issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going back to your point about humanity, about humans being sort of universally the same. And I was reminded of an essay by Joan Didion called On Morality. I don't know if any of you have read it or not, but she wrote it kind of in response to protests against the war in Vietnam. You may not know this about her, but she voted for Goldwater.
Yes, I do know. Yes.
we do know about that.
So she's kind of quirky in that way. But in this essay, she's trying to argue that morality only exists, is relative, and only exists at a kind of very basic level. And she talks about being in the desert, and there's an accident, and somebody dies, and the concern about burying the body is a kind of very basic moral sort of principle that people share. And she talks about, a nurse driving, 100 miles to make sure that this person will get buried. And so she's making this argument that there's some sort of very atavistic sort of practices that have a kind of universal appeal. But I don't know. I don't know what human nature is myself. I mean, I think it's different. And also, I wanted to say that as Americans, we tend to forget that we're not a very big part of the whole world. I mean, people think differently in all kinds of places. You mentioned having been in Africa 3 times.
No, but I would say this. And so this is like a big point of where our politics is today, right? As far as how we interact with technology and how we interact with the larger ecology of this. We are all the same. We are one species. We are Homo sapiens. And so in that respect, we are equal in every way in how we interact with technology and how we interact with this environment. So if the environment all goes to pot, everybody's going to pot. When you do with technology, everybody interacts with that technology the same way. So it's a way to look at, and I would say one of the biggest things of the last, say, 50 years is for the first time in human history, everyone on this planet kind of understands we're on this planet. Now, what that means, I don't know, but 1,000 years ago, in the diversity of all this place, no one had any idea we were all on this one planet. But today, we are all on this one planet, so that makes us all equal in that sense, you know?
Yeah, cultures
You know,
are much more localized.
Yeah.
I
So
want to
I
make
have-
sure that
oh,
Joe
sorry.
has a chance to possibly sell a few books. So maybe one more.
Oh, I
Yeah.
was just gonna say when you said that AI, you know, the last thing I would say though is, I was looking at no one's mentioned robots, but I thought it was really interesting because Elon was talking about how when he tried to do the Doge thing and everyone hated him and so he didn't do it, but what he saw was a big problem with our money situation in this country in terms of just like we're super bankrupt. And he said, how in the world are we going to get out of this bankruptcy? How are we going to produce enough materials because we don't have enough people that want to do the work that needs to be done? And he had this whole, it was very interesting, I have to say. And then he said, you know, I have to create these robots because they have to do the work. It's an enormous amount of work to create the amount of wealth that we need to get us out of where we are. And so whether or not you agree with him, that's one thing. But what I know, but it's interesting. But what is interesting is that the next thing I see is a robot, you know, taking a chainsaw and going to a work site. And I was just like, that is not the image that makes me feel very safe. So in the robot dogs and the machine that, you know, so I think what we're going to be confronted with in the next 15 years are armies of robots and drones. And we have a lot of things that are coming down the pike that threaten our very humanity. And that is the next step. Because what you're trying to say is that we need to create a collective humanity so that we can make decisions together about how we live. But while that's broken, we're going to have to face this mechanization that's going to come at us in ways that we don't even understand. Like drone swarms,
right. So I would
like
say
armies of robot dogs, like surveillance. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like completely
look. I think that's all.
mind-blowing.
I think that's all
And
part of
freaking me out.
this. I think that's all part of that. But I
Yeah.
think like this AI thing right now, how the architecture of
It's
it.
all in there.
I know,
too.
no,
The AI is
but
in all
right.
this stuff.
But the AI thing and how they're
Sorry.
doing it's all part of the robotics and everything. But
Yeah.
how they're doing it, it's not going to happen. Like the amount of energy that they
Yeah,
need,
we don't have enough energy.
it's
That's
just
thank
not going to
God we
happen.
don't.
I can guarantee it's not going to
that's
happen. So at some point, this is all going to come together.
Yeah.
And I'll just make a comment on the debt because if you remember that book I did 12 years ago, it was about money.
Yes.
But so what we need to do with the debt is we're going to have to destroy a lot of debt. Now, the problem with that is that just like
Just forget it
this
exists.
debt doesn't exist anymore.
Just
right,
like
right,
what's
right,
happening
right,
with World Bank stuff. Like
Right.
just it's
And-
just not
but-
there anymore.
The power structure of this country is all built on that debt. So that's going to be, we have to rethink about how that power structure
Yeah.
works. So, and Elon, but anyway, so, anyway,
Just saying.
that is a solution. That is a solution, which, how we look, how the dominant forces look at things aren't going to happen. But, when there's a